Alright guys, MTech Guy here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the little 1 Series, the E87 130i. Now we've got oil leak issues going on with this at the minute, yes, believe it or not, and of course this has got the 3-litre N52 engine, which are notorious for oil leaks, so we're going to be taking care of a couple of oil leaks today, the valve cover gasket and a Valvetronic gasket. They're both accessible with the removal of the same parts, so just makes sense to take care of them both together. But they are both leaking pretty bad. Come and check it out. Alright guys, check this out. If we take a look down the right hand side of the engine here, you can see we've got a bit of a horrendous mess going on down there. It's even getting down onto the steering linkage down there now. And if we take a look down the front here, you can see where that red gasket is. It's starting to look a bit black. It's been pouring out, and when that valve cover gasket does start leaking, you'll find that you'll start to see it down this side of the engine, because obviously the straight six engine is tilted that way, so it ends up pouring out down here. And what happens is it ends up getting onto your exhaust manifold, and you'll first start noticing what's going on once you start the vehicle in the morning, when the vehicle's been sat for quite a number of hours. That oil will have just dribble down onto the exhaust manifold there, and then you'll find that once you start the vehicle up, you'll get a bit of a burning smell in the cab, very carbon type smell, and what that is, that's all the oil burning off and then all the vapours getting into your vents, and that's what you can smell in the cab there. Now I've been a bit slack here, I should have got onto this job a long time ago, but I've been daily driving this car and I've had a lot of other stuff going on, and mine's got that bad. It's got to the point where when I start the car up in the morning, for the first few kilometres I'll drive, it's even smoking. There's smoke coming out the wheel arches there and out the grille at the front. I've got people looking at me in traffic like, yeah mate, your car's on fire. I'm like, no, it's fine, don't worry, it's just an N52 engine, the oil's pouring out of it, they are a sieve, it's completely normal. So yeah, if you do own a BMW with an N52 engine, get used to dealing with oil leaks. But anyhow, let's take a look at the parts required to get the job done. Alright, so let's take a look at what we've got here. So we've got the valve cover gasket itself here. Now this one comes as a kit with the gasket for the spark plug openings as well. Now I've gone for a genuine BMW one here. There are cheaper aftermarket options available out there, but to be honest with you, when it comes to doing a valve cover gasket, I always go for the genuine BMW ones. And with these engines being prone to leaking so badly, I just want to be able to get a gasket that's going to last the distance, do it once, do it right, and hopefully this should last a reasonable amount of time before we have to go in and redo the job again sometime in the future. And it is worth mentioning that this is a different type of gasket to the later N52 engines. So mine's got the magnesium valve cover, and this came with this steel type coated gasket, where the later N52 engines with the black plastic valve cover, they came with like a rubber style gasket, which is different to this one. And you can identify the two different engines with the silver cover on the engine, that's the magnesium valve cover engine, and if you got the black engine cover, then you'll have the later style N52 with the plastic valve cover. Okay, then moving on, we've got the gasket here for the Valvetronic motor. That's what that one looks like. And then we've got a full set of aluminium bolts for the whole valve cover itself. Now you do have to replace these because they are aluminium, and the reason you have to fit a new set once the originals have been removed is because when you are fitting them and you're torquing them down, they're like a stretch fit, they're torque to yield, so they're only a one-time use bolts, and make sure you buy a full set of new aluminium bolts to go with your gaskets. Alright, let's get into it and take a look at the steps required to get the job done. Alright, so before we get into the job, what I like to do is give the engine bay a good clean up, which I've already done here. You can see everything's nice and clean now. Now that's going to give us a much nicer working area to do this job. So we're not going to be dealing with all that oil and mess that was down the edge there. Now of course, once we do get into the job and start removing parts, there are going to be extra bits and pieces to clean up once we've gained access to them. Now then, going into this job, there are just a couple of things to be mindful of. Now, as you can see, this engine is reasonably buried. Now, if you're doing this job on a 5 Series, you are going to have quite a bit more room. 3 Series, a little bit less. And then, of course, this being a 1 Series, everything's really tight. So we've got them back 2 cylinders of the engine buried under the cabin filter housing there. We've got numerous wires and vacuum lines running across the top of the engine there. Expansion tanks going to give us a bit of obstruction too. Under this cover, we've got the injector wiring harness along this edge here, and that's in the way of the bolts to the valve cover itself. So as part of the process, there are going to be several things that we need to get out of the way first before we can actually gain access to the valve cover itself. It is a little bit time consuming, but it's all part of the job. But if you're aware of that going into the job, then it doesn't make it a big deal. And then secondly, of course, this being the N52 engine, we've got the Valvetronic motor under here. So this motor operates a small gear underneath the rocker cover. And what it does, it adjusts the position of the valve in. It's essentially the throttle control on these engines. It does have a throttle body, but that's just wide open on these engines. So your Valvetronic motor is actually the throttle control itself. I won't go into too much detail on that today, but when we come to remove the Valvetronic motor, we do have to put it into a service mode first, because if you just try and unbolt a thing and remove it, what can happen is you can end up breaking the motor itself. And you also risk that when you do come to refit it, the end stops of that gear that Valvetronic motor's moving is going to be out of position, and then it's going to affect your valve positions, and then that's going to affect the running of the engine. So it's important that we do put that in service mode before we remove it, and then once we've completed the job. Now there is a bit of a procedure with the removal and the refitting. I'll run through it when we get to it, and if everything's done correctly, everything should run just fine when we put everything back together. But there is always the potential for that gear that the Valvetronic motor's driving to lose its end stop settings. It'll be out of alignment, and what we can do is recalibrate them end stop positions once we've finished the job. Most of the time it is unnecessary, but it is worth just running through that end stop calibration for that gear just to make sure everything's 100% when we come to finish up the job. We can use a scan tool, but we'll take a look at that towards the end of the video when we get there. Anyway, that's enough yapping about the job. How about we get stuck in and actually do some work now? Alright, so first up we're going to remove the microfilter housing. Now there's 6 bolts holding this in position, and they take an 8mm socket. 2 bolts there, 2 at the front, 2 over the back there. And then this just lifts up and out. Then we've got the 2 plastic covers either end to remove. Just a rubber tab here to pull back, tab at the back to pull up, and 1 at the front. And same on the left hand side. Now we're ready to remove the under tray here. So that's held in with another one of these rubber tabs there. A screw there which takes an 8mm socket, and exactly the same over the other end. And then before we lift it away, we just have to disconnect this wiring harness bracket here. We also have this air quality sensor to remove, so we can just turn that 45 degrees, and that just slides out there, and we can unclip the bracket here and then lift it out of the way. So when it comes to remove the wiring harness bracket here, there's just 3 clips holding that on there to the underside of the tray. And what we're going to do is take a flat blade screwdriver. We're just going to reach in there, push the pins down, and then they'll pop out from each clip. And then we're going to release these 3 clips here to let go of that wiring harness bundle there. So again, we're going to take the flat blade screwdriver and just ease them open. Go careful, you don't want to break anything. So now we can ease the tray up, just pull that out of there. Same, pop the vacuum line off the bottom, and then we're ready to lift this up and out. And next up, we're going to remove this strut brace here, get it out of the way. There's a fastener at either end holding that one, and the one closest to the windscreen, we just need to remove that little plastic cover. So we're going to use a flat blade screwdriver, just turn that and pop it out. And this one's just a 45-degree turn. And then this bolt takes an E87 socket. And while removing this, we just want to be careful that we're not going to drop it down the back of the engine there. So we'll retrieve it with a magnet. And then this bolt at the front of the strut brace here, that takes an E16 socket, so a little bit smaller. And then this thing just lifts up and slides out. Okay, so what we're going to do next is remove this rectangle box here that's holding all the cables there, and that's just going to allow us to be able to flex them cables a little bit extra to give us a bit of extra room to remove the valve cover itself. So there's 3 clips over the back there to release, and then that just opens up and we'll pull all the wires out. So I'll give us a bit of extra wiggle room there now. Then we're going to get this vacuum line out the way. So to do that, we just need to push this little white tab down and then release the end of the hose there. It's likely that this might be a little bit frozen in there if it's been there a while. So I'm just going to ease that out with a flat blade screwdriver as I push the clip down. And now we can remove this plastic cover. Now this is just held on with some metal clips underneath here with holes in, and they just sit on some little ball studs. So it's literally just a case of grabbing it and just popping it up, releasing them clips, and then lifting it out of the way. Alright, so there we have it, that's the valve cover itself, and as you can see here's some little ball studs that we're holding the underside of the cover on, and that's what they attach to on the underside. So it's literally just, like I say, grab hold of it and pop it off. So next we're going to remove this sensor here. This is the eccentric shaft sensor. Now there's a chance that the seal for this could be leaking also, so this is a good time to replace that seal. It doesn't look too bad, and to be honest with you, it's easy enough to come back in later on and put a new seal in there if you have to, but it is just a nice to do while you're busy with this job. So to remove this, there's a small clip either side. We're just going to ease them apart with a flat blade screwdriver and then pop that off. And once you've removed the eccentric shaft sensor, you might find a little bit of oil in there in the connection, so it is worth giving them a blast out with some electrical contact cleaner just to give it a good clean up before you come to put it back together later on. And as you can see, looks like I've had a bit of oil spillage here in the past when this has been topped up. It's crept under the plastic cover there, so I'll give all that a good clean up when I get the valve cover removed. Righto, so next up we need to remove all 6 ignition coils. So first up we need to pop off all the electrical connectors for them, and to be able to do that just need to lift this flap up, and what it'll do is it'll push the connector out. If they've been in there a while, do be careful though, because what can happen sometimes is when you lift these up it won't push it out, and sometimes these can break, so it is worth just making sure you've got a good hold of either edge there where it hinges, just so it doesn't pop out, and then just gently ease that up and it'll force the connector out. And now we can remove the ignition coils. So what I like to do, just push that flap back down, just give it a little twist just to break the seal. I'm going to lift the flap back up, and then I'm going to take a 3/8 extension and put that through the flap there, and then that just gives us something to grab hold of, and we can pull up on that evenly. Right, so next up what we're going to do is just remove these 2 bolts here holding the earth straps, and then that'll allow us to lift this wiring harness out of the way. So these take a E10 socket, and just take a mental note of the earth straps that are bolted there, because you want to make sure they're back in position when you come to put it back together, and just go careful with this flat earth strap here because they do break quite easily. Right, so next up we can move on to the Valvetronic motor. So first we'll remove the electrical connector for that one. And now we're ready to put this thing into service mode before we go unbolting it. So to be able to do that, we're going to take a 4mm Allen key, we're going to insert it in the end there, and we're going to rotate it clockwise, just slowly. And what that's going to do, that's just going to position that gear to the end stop. And then once you start feeling a little bit of resistance, stop turning it. So I've got a 4mm Allen bit on a ratchet here, makes it a little bit easier. Just going to gently turn that clockwise until we're met with some resistance. There we go. Now we have 3 mounting bolts, 2 there, and then there's one underneath, just down there. So we'll start off with the awkward one down the bottom here. And these take an E8 socket. Try not to drop that bolt as it comes out. And we've got the 2 bolts either side, and again these take an E8 socket. And these are steel bolts, so you don't need to replace these later on like the aluminium ones around the perimeter of the valve cover. Now we're just going to remove these bolts. We're not going to pull the motor out just yet. I'm going to loosen this up. It might be quite stuck on there if it's been on there a while. Right, now that that's free, what we're going to do is take our 4mm Allen again, and we're just going to wind this out anti-clockwise, and that'll just wind them gear teeth off the gear inside there. So that's the Valvetronic motor removed, and you can see how this works. Once this electric motor is energized, turns that shaft there with the worm gear on, and that drives the gear under the valve cover. But like I say, it's important that them end stops for that gear calibrated. But that's okay, because we've got it in service position now. You can just pop this old gasket out of the way. We shall be replacing this one today. Just make a note of which way around it goes, so obviously these tabs facing outwards. Now then, next up we're going to remove this hose down the back here that's clipped on this fitting on the back of the valve cover there. Now this is the hose for the CCV valve, or your PCV, your crankcase breather system. Now this is just clipped on with a wee circular clip there. I'll show you it once I get it out of there. What we need to do, we need to push the tabs in top and bottom and then slide it off. So what I'm going to do is grab that with one hand. It can be quite tricky because there's hardly any room around the back here. I'm going to grab that top and bottom, push there, and I'm going to use my other hand with a flat blade screwdriver just in that gap there. I'm just going to slowly ease that off. Be very careful because you do not want to break this. It is tricky, but that's probably the easiest way to get that unclipped. Use a smaller screwdriver just to ease the clips off the side there. There we go. If we take a look there, you can see that clip. So that's where you push it top and bottom. It's supposed to release these tabs here. So I just pushed that out with a large flat blade screwdriver, and I did have to get a smaller screwdriver just to encourage these 2 clips to release. Just take your time and that should come off easily without breaking anything. And now that's out of the way, you can see we've got these wires here to the oxygen sensors. They're going to be in the way, so we need to get them out of the way. So what we'll do is just release the electrical connectors on the oxygen sensors there, and then we can lift that wiring out of the way. And that's just a case of pushing the tab down and pulling the connector off. Do be careful you don't get these 2 mixed up. You shouldn't do, because the wiring will be much longer for one than the other. But if there's any uncertainty, just mark one of them with a bit of tape so you know where to put it back when you come to put it back together. Saves you getting the 2 mixed around and confusing the computer. Then next up, we're going to remove the harness here for the fuel injectors, because that's just blocking our bolts there for the valve cover, and it's going to be in the way for the removal anyhow. So to be able to remove this, we just need to unclip it from each injector. Obviously there's 6 of them. You have a little wire clip on them. You might be able to see that just down there. So what we're going to do is just pop them off with a tiny pocket flat blade screwdriver. And do be careful, because these can spring off and you can end up losing them down in the depths of the engine bay there. So it is worth just having a magnet in position as you release them, and then you can just capture them, save them falling down. So I'll go through and do all 6 of them now, and then we can release that wiring harness. All 6 clips now released, so now we can lift that wiring harness up and off the injectors. And then it is worth just pushing the metal clips back on the connectors, and they can be reseated, and then when you come to refit this connector to the injectors, they'll just snap back in position. And again, you don't want to lose these clips, so it is worth just clipping them back on before we go any further. Okay, so now we've got a bit of clearance to all the bolts around the perimeter there. Got a bit of movement with this harness here to get it out of the way. Now we're ready to release the valve cover itself. So there's 22 bolts holding these on. The ones around the perimeter there, they take an E10 socket, and then you've got 3 down the centre there, they take a 10mm socket. And just be mindful that these are aluminium bolts, so don't go crazy. If you feel like it's not coming out properly, just take your time, because you don't want to shear any of these off, or you're just going to create yourself a load of extra work that you can do without. Right, so let's go through and remove all them bolts now. And if we take a look at the bolts, the 3 that run down the centre of the valve cover, they're slightly longer and they have this spacer, quite a large spacer on there. That's the hex head. And these ones around the perimeter, a little bit shorter, got a shorter spacer, and then they take that E10 socket. Alright, we're just about ready to remove the valve cover from the engine now. So we've got all our wiring harnesses loose, so we can flex them up, and that'll give us just enough room to get the valve cover up and out there. Now it does take a little bit of manoeuvring to get it just in the right position to get it out, so take your time. It will want to catch on everything on the way out, so just move it around gently and eventually it'll come out. What I am going to do is remove the expansion tank here, just to give myself a bit of extra working room there. So there's 2 bolts holding this on. They take a 10mm socket, and then we're just going to gently move that over and out of the way, just let it sit there on the weight of the hoses. Right, now we can lift off that valve cover, and if you're concerned about these wiring harnesses being a little bit dirty, it is worth just giving them a wipe down, just so you don't get any dirt dropping inside your cylinder head there. But otherwise, we're ready to lift it off. Now, you might want to give this a few taps around the edges with either a nylon or a rubber mallet. Don't mind getting anything in the ceiling face there to prise it apart. There are some tabs there which you can get hold of. Obviously there's that fitting with the bottom there. Again, as you can see, mine's reasonably loose. So we'll lift that up and out of the way now. Remove that old gasket. And the one out the centre. That's the valve cover now out of the way, and that's the guts of the cylinder head staring us in the face. You see it's got that golden tinge to it. Obviously, whoever's been servicing this over the years, it's had that castrol edge that seems to leave this golden colour. Right, so the next job, we want a nice clean sealing surface for our new valve cover gasket. So we're going to go around the whole perimeter, clean all this up so it's nice and clean, there's no gasket material left on there, and then the same along the middle there. And then what we'll do is we'll position the new gaskets in place when we're ready. What I've done is I've put a couple of zip ties on this harness just to keep it up out of the way so it's not dangling right in there. And as long as this is clean, shouldn't have anything to worry about with these wiring harnesses just sitting where they are. And once we've got the cylinder head cleaned up, what I'll do is come through and clean this valve cover up. Again, all the mating surfaces, and just make sure there's no debris sitting inside the internals of the valve cover. Okay, so I've got all the mating surfaces cleaned up now. I just used some brake clean on a rag, just went around it slowly, make sure it's all nice and clean. Now, if you do get any stubborn bits and you need to scrape it, just go real gentle with it. You don't want to score or mark this sealing face whatsoever, and you don't want to go at it with an abrasive either, because you're going to put hollows in it, which is going to cause it to leak. But anyhow, I've got the new gasket positioned in place there now, and it sits on 2 dowels, one there and a dowel right in the opposite bottom corner there. So just make sure that's positioned correctly, and then same with the one down the center there, just a couple of dowels that sits on just to keep it in position. I've cleaned the valve cover inside and out, and I've also cleaned the perimeter sealing surface and the ones down the middle, got that nice and clean, ready for the install. So now we can put that valve cover back in position. I'm going to take my time with it, I'm going to go very slowly, and the one thing you want to be mindful of is you don't want to disrupt the gasket. You don't want to catch the edge or pull it off them dowels and end up with it slipping down, and then you go to clamp it down and everything's going to be misaligned. And of course, just like taking it off, it is quite tricky getting it back in position, but I find if you bring it in sort of this position and then bring it like that, just feed it round everything as you go and get that seated down nice and secure. So that's the valve cover back in position now, and it is worth just going around the edges there just to make sure that gasket is all seated correctly and it hasn't slipped out while we've been shuffling the valve cover in there. And same, it's worth looking down them spark plug holes just to make sure there's been no misalignment with the gaskets. And then at this stage we're ready to install all the new aluminium fasteners. So what I'm going to do is go around, install them all by hand, just wind them all down finger tight, and then once all them fasteners are down nice and level, all finger tight, what we'll do is go through and torque them all up. Longer ones to start off with, down the centre. Right, so that's all the new fasteners in position now, and like I say, they're all wound down just finger tight, so everything's nice and level. So what I'm going to do next is go around and torque them all. I'm going to start in the middle and work in like a circular pattern outwards. So we're going to go middle and then opposite bolts like that. So we're going to go around and do them all up to 7 Newton meters, and then after that we need to go round them all again and give them a 90-degree turn. So that's all the fasteners torqued down to 7 Newton meters now, and like I said at the start of this video, it is important that you do torque these down properly because they're a torque to yield fit, they're stretch fit, so we want to make sure we're not going to damage them bolts. Torque down properly, and of course we're going to get an even nice seal around that gasket. So now they're all at 7 Newton meters. I'll go around and tighten them all 90-degree turn. Alright, so that's all the fasteners torqued to spec. Now I've got the expansion tank re-secured down there with the 2 fasteners that take a 10mm. So next up, I'm going to clip in that harness for the fuel injectors. So as long as all them little metal clips are seated right down in position, that'll just snap on the fuel injectors nicely. Now I'll reconnect the oxygen sensor connectors, feed the wires in, like where they should seat. And we can grab our crankcase hose here for the CCV, clip that back on. New seal for the Valvetronic motor, and just make sure that them tabs are facing outwards. So push that in there, and we'll get our motor. And when we come to refit this, we're not going to just push it straight in there. We need to get that 4mm Allen on the back end there and just feed it in clockwise. Just slowly. There we go. Back in with the fasteners, to either side, and the one underneath. Reconnect the connector for the Valvetronic motor. Back in with the ignition coils. We can bolt this bracket back in place with the earth straps. Then we're just going to snug them up. Don't go too mad because they are an aluminium bolt, so we don't want to shear them off. Now we can plug in the electrical connector for the Valvetronic motor. Same with the ignition coils. They just push in like that, and then as you pull the tab down, it'll snap into place. An eccentric shaft sensor will give that a bit of a clean out, some electrical contact cleaner. And plug it back in. Now we can fit the engine stiffener brace. Plug the vacuum line back in. Next we'll put the casing back for the wire in here. The under tray back on, that cable back in, vacuum line in there, slide this one in here, we'll put the cap back, fasteners back, slide the engine cover back on, microfilter housing back in position, and refit the fasteners. The end covers back on. The air quality sensor back in position. Alright guys, there we have it. That's everything all buttoned up and back together now. So only thing we need to think about now is that Valvetronic motor and calibrating the end stops. Now, if you followed the procedure with the removal and reinstallation, it should be in the service position still. Should be all good to go. Now, what I normally like to do is just cycle the ignition just to make sure everything's happy. Now, if you have any uncertainty about that Valvetronic gear position, what we can do is go a step further and recalibrate the end stop positions with the scan tool. So let's take a look at that now. Alright, so like I say, if you followed everything correctly with regards to putting that Valvetronic motor into service mode before you removed it and then refitting it properly, everything should be all set. Alright, so we've got the scan tool plugged in here. Just turn the ignition on. So we've got a service, powertrain, got a special functions, and then learn Valvetronic limit position. Right, and that's it, job done. Alright guys, so there we have it. That's them oil leaks taken care of now. So that's the valve cover gasket and that Valvetronic motor gasket all sorted. Now if you found this video interesting or useful, don't forget to give it a like, and make sure you go and check out the rest of my YouTube channel for more BMW DIY content. Consider subscribing if that's your cup of tea. I'm MTech Guy. Thanks a lot for watching.